Welcome to the Unwashed Asses, episode 87, recorded for Wednesday, February 27th, 2019. It's the end of February, and you know what that means? Beginning of March. What comes with the beginning of March? Shamrock shakes. Bop, bop, bop. Had my first of the season, though, and not good. Not good at all. It's like they need to calibrate the amount of mint that's being dumped into the shake because it was awful. I drank the whole thing because I'm a fat fuck. But, yeah, it was not good. Not good. Doesn't bode well for the rest of the season in my Shamrock Shake consumption. Words are hard. I need to eat lunch. Speaking of Shamrock Shakes, yeah, I need to eat something. But no, we're going to get another episode out here. And what are we talking about this episode? Not Shamrock Shakes. Instead, we're going to be talking about Anthem. Anthem, for those not in the know, was the most recently released title. Recently released. Everything I say is going to sound wrong right now because I'm being hypercritical. By BioWare and published by EA on the Origin platform for PC and, of course, PS4 and Xbox One. There's been a lot of controversy around the game, and that's not what I want to get into today. I'm pretty sure I've talked about the controversy in the past. Instead, now that I finally have beaten the game, I want to talk about the game itself. Anthem is a game that I don't know will replace mainstays in my life like Destiny, but it's definitely a fun addition. I guess we can break it down kind of by category. The story is told in a very odd and disjointed manner. It's a multiplayer game with a large emphasis on single player within the campaign itself. To the extent that the main hub of the game, Fort Tarsis, is completely isolated for each individual player. So say you're in a group of friends and you're done running a mission, you go back to the fort to talk to folks and grab a new mission and work on your javelin. You can't see other players in the fort. The closest you get is it's not the forge, it's another area itself, which is almost completely useless in the sense that you don't really do anything. You can see other players there, but there's no, say, firing range, there's no way to really interact, there's no built-in chat function in the game. At best, you can just view other... Actually, get your ass away from the microphone. You can view their loadouts, you can add them as friends, but again, since it's all randomized with who shows up in there, it's almost kind of a moot point. So, when it comes to story, though, it's, despite being told in a disjointed fashion where you have to run around the fort and talk to pretty much everybody that you can interact with to progress the story, pick up a new mission, then run back to where your fancy robot suit is hanging out, select the mission from a map, then launch the mission, complete mission, come back, rinse and repeat. It's told in a better way than a game like Destiny, and I'm going to draw a lot of comparisons to Destiny, I think, just because it is apt for comparison, and also because it's my favorite franchise. There is a main story which is unfortunately very predictable. That's my main takeaway from it. It follows your character, the freelancer, who after a failed run at something called the Heart of Rage, I think that's it. You think I'd have this shit down before I decided to talk to you about it. Ends in spectacular failure. The freelancer class has been pretty much exiled and is shunned. There aren't as many contracts for them coming in, protecting the world, the cities of the world beyond their main borders. But a new threat called the Dominion is coming back. The Dominion had sought out before to take control of a device that would allow them to tap into the Anthem of Life, hence the name of the game. Anthem of Life is supposedly a mystical life force, so that governs, creation and destruction. So it's up to you to rebuild the old gang, as it were, the survivors from the failed Heart of Rage attack, build up a new bit of warriors, and take down the Dominion and save the world. Straightforward enough, but again, pretty predictable, pretty by-the-books hero fare. But it is well told. I will say that. It's, despite seeing things coming from a mile off, it is an enjoyable experience. Took me a little under 21 hours to blast through all the main storyline and a lot of the secondary stories. And that's where Anthem really shined for me, was in those side stories, because something that they've always done well is build up characters and make NPCs feel important. Most notably, Dragon Age and Mass Effect showed this off to great effect, but it's back on display here, where throughout the journey in playing the game, I found myself caring a lot more about these characters than I thought I would, because on first firing up the game, it's like, I don't give a shit about any of this. There's a lot of narration going on, there's a lot of world building they're trying to do, and I just don't give a fuck. And that's true for the bulk of the main story and the backstory they try to build up, because like many other games, this is a post-apocalyptic, futuristic utopian where, despite using technology from the past, that was created hundreds of years ago, there's no real new innovation on it. Despite civilization not having any major real drawbacks after that first calamity. But they try to build up this lore about these Lancers and the Javelins and this Legion of Dawn, and I just don't care. I can't get that invested into the major backstory of another franchise at this time. I got really, really deep into Destiny, and I enjoyed it because it painted and created a whole new universe, but when you compare Anthem to something like that, it just feels kind of meager. And granted, Destiny's had 2 games to kind of really flesh itself out. While I'm more interested in the overall lore of something like Destiny, the story in Anthem is told better. And that, again, getting back to the side characters, every time you go out on a mission and come back, most characters will have something new to say, where you can interact and make certain choices with them and direct how your relationship with them is going to go. And it's told in a pretty straightforward manner, where the game's all first person when you're in the third person while you're out exploring. But they're almost like pseudo cinemas, where you can see the person you're talking to moving around, interacting with other characters, and the voice acting is done extremely well. They got a lot of really good talent in on this. The animations are straightforward when they're not buggy, and characters aren't spasming around the scene. But a lot of care and craft went into each one of these characters, and it really pays off, because because there's a lot to do with these characters, where you'll go out on a mission and come back, and sure, it's all the same people you have to talk to, but you have to talk to the same dozen or more people each and every time to progress their individual stories. And it's not just a matter of learning more about them and progressing the story for the sake of it. You also get experience and all these other perks to doing it. So there's a little bit of incentive behind it. But the characters are so wonderfully realized and fleshed out that I had more fun working on their side stories, like Yarrow's, compared to the main story. And what makes me sad is I don't think there's a whole lot more of those left for me, because I was pretty diligent in my playthrough to knock out as much of the side content as I could. That being said, when we get into things like the gameplay, kind of like the story, there's promise, there's potential there, but it's kind of meager at this point, where everything's done in third person. It's done, you can either play solo or you can do private parties with up to 4 people, or you can do matchmaking with 4 other people. And again, this is another point that I got to give to Anthem in comparison to Destiny, where Destiny had very lackluster matchmaking, and a lot of the, I guess, essentially anything aside from a strike and basic PvP, there wasn't any matchmaking, and forced players into third-party sites, and it was a terrible way of managing it. Whereas Anthem's like, fuck it. You want matchmaking? It's built in. In fact, we're going to push you really hard towards getting into matchmaking, almost to a detriment. And I say this because right now Anthem is plagued with bugs. Like I had mentioned before, the characters, the animations will get all goofy. There are plenty of horror shows where you can watch on YouTube of people recording these things, like characters disappearing entirely. The instances I've had where my character, when I load into a mission, their head's missing, they're using default gear, I have no weapons abilities, and the game will just repeatedly crash over and over. Things like the audio, if you switch from speakers to headphones, their voices will go down a decibel or two, their tone I should say, and conversely if you go from headphones to speakers, their pitch goes up. It's bizarre. So it's a bit of a hot mess in that terms. It's not so much that it makes the game broken and you can't play it, but every now and then you'll just expect that you have to reboot the game. I've noticed more problems when I played with other people versus playing solo. And that's the recommendation that I will make when it comes to consuming the story and doing the gameplay, is if you're doing something that's important to the story, do it by yourself or with a group of friends that have the understanding that you're there to experience the content. Because when you play with a group, like most games that involve multiplayer, especially things with PvE focus, folks will rush just to get it complete and get their rewards. And when it comes to a story, that's no way to really experience it. Now, with that in mind, there's no way to skip the cinemas, so people just can't vote to skip and make you miss that. But if they're constantly rushing ahead, a lot of the story is also told through audio as you're out in the world, because you're patched into a comm system and you have your support back at the base or other NPCs in the world communicating to you through that. And so folks are just rushing through content. Sometimes it can get skipped, but a lot of times it just feels really rushed and there's not a good pace to it. Conversely, you could be stuck in loading screen hell. Now, myself, I have a fairly decent system, so usually I'm the one kind of setting the pace rather than following it. I'm not having a hard time keeping up. But folks with lower or even mid-range PCs might be stuck on the initial loading screen getting into the mission, but then also if the party gets too far away from you, even to the point where I was playing a friend and I could still see him playing his day on my screen, but the game thought I was too far away and was in the process of teleporting me to him. Now, teleport wouldn't be such a bad thing if it didn't involve yet another loading screen. And that's another problem that Anthem has right now, is it is just loading screen on top of loading screen. And again, even with a fairly high-end machine, loading times are about 30 seconds a pop, and it's only going to go up for folks, running, again, mid-range computers or even consoles. There's a lot of optimization that has to happen, and it feels like the game was over-designed, where there's just a superfluous amount of menus and options that don't need to be there. The UI is kind of bad. It's hard to navigate things. Once you get it down, it's not terrible, but it's just too much, and it's too cluttered. It's too loud. It's kind of like a joke. If you have to explain a joke, it's not a good joke. Same thing with the UI. If you have to explain how to use the UI, it's not a good UI. But the gameplay itself is, again, straightforward. It's a shooter with teams of 4. You can blast through the content fairly easily. Thankfully, there are multiple difficulties, and this is where it comes into comparison to a game like Diablo, where yes, it's a looter shooter based in the same veins of Destiny or Borderlands. However, it has more of the grind that Diablo offers, I think, because Borderlands really didn't have an adjustable difficulty, and Destiny has little to nothing in regards to that as well. Sure, you can do nightfalls and raids, but there's no real way to easily adjust the difficulty per mission. And that's where Anthem kind of steps in, like Diablo, where you'll set your difficulty each mission. You have normal, you have hard, and then a couple others past that. And as your character gets geared up and their item score goes up, you will adjust to those different difficulties to then get better loot and, you know, keep upping the level, as it were. You know, it's again like Diablo's torment system, where better gear allows you to do harder content gives you better gear to do even, you know, more difficult content. So for that, I think it's going to scratch a lot of folks' itches. It plays well enough. The shooting mechanics are fairly solid, but again, the game's buggy. So in my instance, there will be problems with enemies I'm shooting rubber banding around, or projectiles that I should have dodged still hitting me, or in cases where your character gets frozen or stuck in webs, they say, well, jump, and it should clear that status effect quicker. Instead, my character repeatedly gets slammed into the ground. The environments aren't really all that different. It's all one big jungle with a series of underwater areas and underground caverns, but there's no like ice levels, or sure, there's thunderstorms and whatnot running around, but again, it's kind of this idyllic utopia. It's this perfect world. I compared it a lot to Lost Planet 2 when I had played the beta in overall design, except Lost Planet 2 had a bit more in terms of variety with deserts and snow. And it would be nice to see that if we could travel to different cities and get experience with different biomes and see how that handles with our javelins, because that's another component to the gameplay, is managing the status of your suit. So flight is a huge part of it. It's fun to fly around, but one constant nagging thing is resource management with the heat system, where if you fly too long, the heat will build up in your suit and force you to land for half a second, where it then dissipates the heat, allowing you to take off. And the trick to it is, oh yeah, you can fly straight down to cool off the engines, you can fly through the water, you can go next to a waterfall. Rain will passively cool it, as will flying close to the water. And while it gives you something to do while you're flying, I feel that the timer itself is a bit much. The heat system could be cooled off, so to say, or, you know, decrease heat gain by 50%, and it helps. And there are mods and components that you can put on the Javelin which will help mitigate this, but it's just it's annoying, and it's unnecessarily so. I could understand not wanting to give unlimited flight, because then it would make it boring, and this keeps you active and engaged, but at the same time, it's a bit much. Additionally, there's no way to swap weapons or gear in the middle of a mission. All this has to be set up before you roll out. So testing loadouts is difficult at best, where the best way to do it is to load into a free play session and tinker around, load out of the free play session, change your weapons, go back into it and try. Now bear in mind, each time you load into a free play session or get out of it, there is another loading screen that has to happen, as well as getting into the forge to modify your gear. So again, a lot of loading screens, not a lot of optimization, and overall kind of a poor experience in that front. Adding to that, after aside from story missions and dungeons and just your odd contract, the only other mode is free play. Free play allows you to fly around the map and complete small objectives, find resources, find treasure chests, and acts as filler content to unlock other things in the game, like, oh, you have to complete so many world events, or find so many mineral deposits, or open so many treasure chests. The problem is there's no way to set markers. There are no indicators on the map as far as any public events that are happening. Destiny 2 really improved upon Destiny 1 in this regard, where Destiny 1 had the same problem, where there are no real indicators on the map as to what was happening. But D2 fixed that with, like, oh, here's your lost sectors, here's your region chests, here's where strikes are, here's where world events are happening, here's our timers on that. And Anthem could definitely benefit from having something like this in play. Now, I get it, the map is just, there's one big map instead of several little maps like Destiny. and there's a lot to do. But however, you add in a zoom function, and when I think of games like Horizon Zero Dawn, where there is a fuckload going on in the map, zooming in and out is key, where you get you get the 1,000-foot view, but if you want to know what's going on in your area specifically, it's still easy to find that information. Anthem has none of that. And in one quest in particular, where you have to find several grave sites to progress the story, it was a pain in the ass to navigate, find them, and then complete the objectives, and then fly back to them, open them up, and it really bogged down the experience. Free play definitely needs an overhaul with not only markers, but adding in more characters and maybe a text-based chat system or even a ping system like Apex Legends is using. Now, that being said, the world itself is gorgeous. It is visually stunning, and I have not run into any real visual hiccups with it. I enjoy flying around through the jungle. Going underwater is gorgeous with bioluminescence. The underground caverns are kind of in that same vein where there's a lot of pretty lights to look at. Weather effects like lightning storms are super cool, with trees blowing realistically and rain pelting your screen, and lightning strikes, catching the forest on fire around it. It's all expertly done, and the sound work is just as good. The soundtrack could use a bit more work. I wasn't getting too into it, wasn't jazzed by it. It didn't elicit any emotion from me, but the weapons sound good enough, as do the abilities, and the radio chatter, while overwhelming and confusing at first because there can be so many different people talking at once you get comfortable with it, it's actually not bad. When you're just doing contract after contract or strike after strike, sure, it can get old and repetitive. But again, in games where there's dungeons that you're going to do over and over again, you kind of tune that stuff out because you've done it so many times. And that's kind of where another pitfall of the game is there's a real lack of enemy variety. Now, in Destiny, I know I've complained a lot about the lack of enemies, and we only have 4 enemy groups. In Anthem, there's fewer. We have, I essentially classify it as, you have the Scar, you have the Dominion, you have Outlaws, which all kind of function the same, Wildlife, and then Titans. It's real lacking in that regards, where all the human enemies, even the Scar, who are technically bug people, they all have basic patterns where they have guns. You have some that can use abilities much like yours. There's bigger, even bigger ones in little mechs. But overall, they exhibit the same patterns. They use the same weapons. The AI is kind of dumb. Increasing the difficulty only really makes them become bullet sponges. They don't elicit any more advanced tactics or use any different abilities or combinations that make it harder. It's just they get more health. So that was lacking. And on top of that, there's no real character development when it comes to the individual factions. Sure, I know nobody likes the Scar. But why? What are they? They keep saying that they're bug people, but I wasn't sure if it was a metaphor or if they're actually bug people. We had one of the leaders talk to us, but they were, again, in a giant mech, so I didn't know what the fuck it even was. Dominion, sure, it's another human city, but we only get hints as to what that city is like and what the ruling system is like. Sounds brutal, it sounds awful, but again, I'd like to have this fleshed out a little bit more. And then just the Wildlife. Wildlife doesn't really have much to offer. The Outlaws are renegade humans. There's not much that's going on in terms of enemy variety. So while it's fun to fly around and shoot, it gets repetitive. It becomes a numbers game of chasing the carrot, making that item level go up once the story is completed. And I don't know how much longer that's going to hold my attention. Again, I'm a little under 21 hours into it, but I've beaten the main story. I only have a few of these side stories left, and then it's just going to be a grind. I'm only at level 21 out of 30. So yeah, I'm going to grind up to 30 and then try to hit the item level cap. But past that, unless there's DLC, I don't know how much I'm going to be really into it. It's fun, but if I'm just playing a game to play a game, I'd rather go back to Destiny, where the shooting mechanics are a lot more solid. And this is Anthem is a game that kind of tries to straddle that line of gunplay versus abilities, whereas Destiny leans far more into gunplay. Anthem leans far more into ability usage. And I will say that the classes themselves, there's only 4 with the Colossus, the Interceptor, the Ranger, and then the Storm, all feel relatively balanced. None feels super overpowered, or like one character will carry a group versus another over another. It's still, I don't know, it's different. I like gunplay versus using abilities, and in my case where I'm playing the Ranger, his abilities are essentially shooting different kinds of missiles. It's not like I'm calling down lightning as the Storm, or even like the Interceptor, they'll have dash abilities, or I don't know. It's not a balance that I'm fully on board with yet, and I'm trying to find a play style that fits for me. In my case, I like the Ranger because it plays a lot like my Titan in Destiny. But it's good. It's enjoyable. Is it worth the $60? I have a hard time agreeing with that. $40 would feel definitely solid. And it's mostly due to the amount of bugs that are in the game right now. It's not in a polished state. Again, there's a lot of load times. There's a lot of animation bugs. The gameplay will just straight up crash and force you to restart it. It's very pretty to look at, but there's not a whole hell of a lot of variety. If you're looking for something fun to play with friends, absolutely, it's definitely worth it. Even if you're only doing like the $15 a month Origin subscription service, I'd say that fits in a bit better with it. But the promise of free DLC and support long after launch is promising. That alone might make it worth the $60, but again, if I'm buying a game as is, or I'm paying the money, I'm paying for the game as it is at launch, and Anthem's not off to a great start. It's getting better. The developers are communicating with the community a lot and working with them, but it's not... Granted, it's only been out for a couple weeks. It has a lot of improvement to go towards, and that's kind of where my gripe with it is that it's acting as a games as a service and following the same pattern of we'll release it now and then fix everything later, and I have a hard time supporting that. So yeah, buyer kind of beware with this one. Maybe wait for it to drop in price before you jump on board. But if you have any thoughts of your own about the game, or otherwise comments, concerns, questions, criticisms, complaints, critiques, or you just want to shoot the shit, send an email over to theunwashedasses@gmail.com. Again, theunwashedasses@gmail.com. And this year, please just tell a friend about the show. Let them know they can get it wherever they get other podcasts. And of course, if you want to go above and beyond, pitching $1 or $2 a month, that's all I ask, over at patreon.com/zeroand09, ZEROAND09. And until next time, be cool to one another. So know that I miss you, and I think about you every day still. It hurts. I don't think it's ever going to stop hurting. But these little therapy sessions, they help make the hurt bearable. Until next time.